So I want to make a crazy story about Hema and conspiracy theories right now. So people don't realize just how much Hema has changed over the years. I started in about 2003 participating in the online community, reading sources, that kind of stuff. And so I've seen like different phases that Hema has gone through and how it's drastically changed. And I don't think people are aware of it unless like you've been in it for the long run. At the very beginning, Hema was what it says it is, which is that it was very much a grassroots movement where people were kind of coming together, compiling sources, making them available, and just starting to do this thing. And it had many of the benefits of like a real grassroots movement like that, in that it was super egalitarian. There was a lot of free sharing of knowledge, and there were some really, really admirable like qualities about creating Hema in that context. It was pretty fantastic to see what people were going to lengths to do to share this stuff and talk about it. The general vibe was it was an honest search for truth. Like people were genuinely trying to figure this stuff out, how it worked for the first time many of the times, and they were having discussions about how it worked. Gradually things changed. And one of the reasons why I think it changed is because of how people perceive value. So the second kind of distinct age that you saw was the age of experts in Hema. So people had started off in this grassroots movement and it transformed into where people started to have knowledge that other people didn't have. So whether that was functioning techniques, interpretations, and that's mainly what it was, and a little bit of like historical knowledge as well, those things quickly ran to the top and they became super valuable because the knowledge was just so scarce back then. Nobody had like expertise. There wasn't a ton of YouTube videos, and the stuff that did, it was mostly like beginners trying to make this stuff work that didn't have huge amount of like martial arts backgrounds, that kind of thing. And so getting taught by a teacher was so rare, and having the ability to do that was so rare that it was incredibly valued. So when you think of value, it's a lot like currency nowadays, which is basically it's meaningless paper. And not even paper, it's like numbers on a screen in a bank that you never see, right? And it only has value because we all agree that it has value. So what that means is value comes from attention. It comes from people's attention and a consensus that it actually is worth something. What you kind of saw during that age when that expertise was so highly valued and scarce was that the people who had that knowledge had immense power. So not just in like dictating online interactions and forums, which was a lot of power. They chose how the conversation would go, when to end it. And back then it felt really important to be able to say your piece. And so when people were cut off from that, maybe they would form another forum, but it was an immense amount of social power to decide who gets to participate and who doesn't. It also had this different component that wasn't just financial. So it wasn't just about financial gain, because in Hema, there are people who do financially gain from it. So it's like shop owners, printing presses, running full-time schools, running fitness clubs. Like there are ways to make it work, but that wasn't the primary drive in all of this. It really became about prestige in that era. So we're talking about the early and late 2000s. It was all about the prestige of being an instructor and, getting invited to fly to places, getting treated kind of like a superstar when you're on the road. And I've experienced this at times going to places. And for somebody like myself, it makes me deeply uncomfortable. That's not really the environment that I thrive in. I don't really like it. And a lot of times I'll avoid it. I'll avoid teaching places because it makes me deeply uncomfortable. And other places where they just know me as a person, I like that a lot better. And I like to have a really informal type of class. And that could just be me as a person that grew up in a blue collar kind of area, and my profession being a social worker. That kind of stuff might really bother you, especially if you're somebody that works in the community. But for a lot of other people, that was it. Like that was very, very important. So during that time, there kind of popped up other subgroups that had an emphasis on competition. So it was kind of the rise of competition. And what I'm going to argue is that people that were anti-competition or wanted to downplay the importance of competition, it wasn't just about what they liked. It wasn't just about stylistically where they wanted to see Hema go, but it was about the devaluation of the value that they had from the scarcity of their knowledge. So you could think about this from like a perspective of maybe selling goods or maybe having a profession. So if suddenly maybe I'm a person that works in IT and the technology changes dramatically, like what we're seeing, and I'm not equipped necessarily to compete or to work in that new environment, and these young people getting out of college, maybe they have completely different training, I really have to adapt, or I'm going to feel like I'm devalued in the workplace and I may have less value. A lot of those experts, they really were treated like elite celebrities. And still to this day, like it didn't just die out. These things are kind of all existing in pockets in different areas and different scenes at the same time. So to the majority of students, they don't know the difference, that the scene has maybe moved on a little bit or that it's become competitive. These things are existing at the same time, but the dominant narrative is changing. And that's hugely important because it's directing the way that conversation goes online and the way things are presented on like YouTube channels. And those are incredibly powerful things because they dictate the value, right? It dictates our attention and focus. It creates reality. So these things are valued and other things are not. And I can't overemphasize enough. I don't even think I could make people realize who weren't there just how much many of these elite kind of clubs led by a figurehead were ran like cults, whether that was in the rankings and even having like spiritual beliefs right in the teachings of swordsmanship. Like it was literally a religion to some people. There was like magic, occult stuff that was going on. And this was considered completely like normal at the time for swordsmanship because it was modeled after like an Asian type martial arts framework, right? And that's kind of normal for that. If you did like Bagua, Tai Chi, 7-star praying mantis Kung Fu, there was a religious and spiritual component, and they had a massive amount, the teachers or the Sifu would have a massive amount of power in people's life. And because Hema was modeled after that, a lot of those clubs had problems because you had experts that had way too much social power in people's lives. And to this day, you can kind of it continues to be seen as like, hey, this is a dating pool for the instructors, when it's like, no, that's not how it should be done. And this is one of the reasons why myself and a lot of other people I know, we like the sporting model. And it's not just because we only want to run it as a sport. That's not true at all. I love the history. I love cutting with sharps. I like the fun of it, right? But there's some things that maybe are accepted that wouldn't be accepted in a sport, an official sport. It wouldn't be allowed, right? And I think that's actually good. It helps with professionality and stops some of those things from happening, which are still going on. So after the rise of competitions, when like medals were really what was important, there was also another shift in addition to that, which was the focus on Hema ratings. And that dramatically impacted the narrative. And that's kind of the phase that we're in today. I think we're going to move into something different, and I'll talk about that later. But you have to remember that our focus, our attention is what creates value in things. And so because it's been stated by a lot of people that the focus on Hema ratings, that's what makes a good swordsman. That's what's seen as valuable right now. And so people are enjoying similar status to maybe the expert era that we're just kind of coming out of. And I would be really critical of that. And some of them are really great, and that's not the case whatsoever. Some of them are just fantastic fencers, right? And they have a good record. That's awesome. But it could descend into that. And I may be a little bit concerned because I've just seen like myself, I've been competing for a really long time. Only recently I've started uploading some of the local competitions on there. You saw my rating skyrocket. It seems like potentially there can be a little bit of a broken system when you have highly skilled fencers competing in a small local area. You can rise up to the top really, really quickly, especially if you go undefeated throughout several tournaments. So there's flaws in the system, but it does give like a better gauge, I would say, than just tournament medals. Where I predict this going, and I don't know if I'm right or not, nobody can really predict it though, is I think we're next going into an age of competency, right? Where it's not just about ratings, it's not just about having expertise of hitting knowledge. I think the next step is that this knowledge is going to be readily available for anyone. And where we really have to take it is back to almost that first phase where things were grassroots, right? And you still have experts, but that expert knowledge is going to be not as valuable as it used to be. And that's a really good thing because there's going to be experts everywhere. So just like in other sports, you can go to a community boxing club with like an amateur coach and they can be off the charts really, really good. You can work with, like, in your area, you can work with people that were on the Olympic team for boxing. It's awesome, right? And I think that's the way we're headed for HEMA as well. But that scares a lot of people, and I think there's going to be a lot of resistance to that. So I think it's one thing to not, like, love competition. That's totally cool. If you don't want to focus on that, you want to be a recreational club, that's great. But I think the pushback we're seeing is more than that. I think it's more about preserving value and really, like, preserving social hierarchies. I can't even emphasize enough about how much social hierarchy and, like, cliques play into some of the experts in HEMA, what it was like back then, because it was not even just to the point of treating your club like a cult and having hierarchies within. Heck, there was, like, even secret societies almost, or religious practices within a group of instructors, right, that were running events, and stuff like that was commonplace, and it was really weird. They were behaving like elites do in society, which is not really acceptable.